Guys, over the last couple of days, I heard about this 32-year-old guy who is being held captive by his stepmom. Talk about evil stepmom, right? She was holding him captive on the second story or second floor of their home in Connecticut, I believe. And apparently his father died January of last year. And even though he was raised in a really hellacious way by his father and stepmom, apparently after his father died, it got even worse. When his father passed away, I guess his clothes went to this guy. By the way, he's 32-year-old Richard Chapman, okay? And his mom's name is Kimberly Sullivan. It's stepmom, okay? She holds him up in the second floor room, captive. But she's denying that. She's saying, no, he was allowed to go wherever he wanted. Nobody was holding him captive or anything, right? But apparently she had two daughters, which would be his stepsisters or half-sisters, excuse me. And apparently they were allowed to grow up normal, get married, move out of the house, the whole 9 yards. He gets his father's clothes when his father passes away. And apparently in one of the coats, there was either a lighter or a book of matches. I believe they said it was an old lighter. He takes that lighter and kind of keeps it to himself, slowly gets some hand sanitizer from, I assume, his stepmom, and then had some printer paper. And apparently he started a fire. The fire people come, right? The fire department, not the fire people, the fire department with firefighters. They come down. And then the mom says, my stepson's in there, help him, right? So they go get him, find out that he basically looks like he survived a gulag, right? He looks like somebody that's emaciated beyond belief. His hair was all matted up. And apparently his teeth were falling out. For the last 20 years of his life, he's been the most unlucky boy / man, probably in all of North America, maybe the world. Apparently, he was abused by his stepmom and father since the age of 3, so basically since he could remember. And I guess a lot of people in the comments were basically saying, why didn't the guy just leave? But apparently, when you're getting psychologically traumatized from an early age, you kind of see yourself as very low self-esteem, very, very afraid of his parents. And he probably still saw himself as like a boy rather than a 32-year-old man. Who knows if he even knew how old he was? Does he even know his own age? Who knows? So I wanted to share with you guys one of the reasons that I think I'm actually one of the luckiest guys in North America or in the United States. A lot of times I bitch, moan, and complain, and I think a lot of us are guilty of that, right? We look at our lives and we think, oh my God, it's boring, it sucks, it's this, it's that, right? It's horrible. Well, I'm gonna walk you by a nightmare house in my neighborhood. So Richard Chapman's house and his mom, Kimberly Sullivan, they lived in a nightmare house where everybody thought it was normal. Well, right now we're walking by this house here. And even the neighbors that lived here, they've lived here for the past handful of years, they probably don't even know this. But this very house here, in the 1980s and 90s, since I could remember, was owned by my friend Richard. His dad and mom obviously owned the house. Richard was 2 years older than me, so as we progressed through the grades, I didn't get to really go to school with him very often. I had went in there and watched TV and ate cereal with him probably on a dozen or more occasions throughout my life. Anyway, make a long story short, his dad was always there. His dad was always very talkative, and his dad came across as a really solid human being. Anyway, fast forward a couple years, all of a sudden we're in high school. And all of a sudden, instead of being one of the cooler kids in school, Richard was kind of one of the nerdier kids, and people were constantly talking shit to him, which didn't really make sense to me. So one day, me and my buddy Don, we saw him at a Taco Bell. This is when we were like sophomores, and I think he was a senior. And we go to Taco Bell and we see him and we start asking him some questions. And all of a sudden, before we even really get into our questions for him, he literally blurts out, "I'm sure you know by now, you've heard that my dad molested those kids or was caught molesting kids." And Don was shocked. I about flew off my chair, and he was basically saying that his dad was found guilty and was going to prison for, I guess, touching some boys, girls, something like that, right? Some children. And it instantly made me realize that although these kids went through some horrible things at that house we just walked by that I showed you, I was apparently spared that horrible thing. His dad never touched me. His dad talked to me on more than one occasion with Richard there and with Richard's mom there, and we always had really good conversations. I never got the vibe that his mom and dad were weird, or I guess it's not his mom, but I never got the vibe that his dad was weird, if that makes sense. But I do recall there were one or two times where Richard had seen if I wanted to like spend the night. And I just remember something always told me when I was younger that I just didn't really like spending the night away from my mom and grandma. I don't know if you want to call it a mommy's boy or what, but I was just kind of afraid to spend the night at people's houses. Did I end up spending the night at my buddy Jeff's house and my buddy Jason's house? Yes, and I spent the night at my buddy Brian's house too, but the difference was they were the same age as me. And with Richard, because he was older, there was only one or two times where we even contemplated it, but I decided not to, if that makes sense. Were those two decisions not to the best decisions of my life? Was there a reason why even at a young age I just felt uneasy about spending the night at older, guys' houses? I don't know. All I know is if you would have told me that if that situation in Taco Bell never happens and we never have this conversation with my childhood friend, I would have gone the rest of my life thinking, Richard's dad was a really cool guy, really nice guy. But that just goes to show you that sometimes people can really be a nice guy or a nice gal to strangers or to your face, but behind closed doors they can be absolute scoundrels. So I just feel really bad for this 32-year-old. He needed for his stepmom to be there for him. And by the way, there's a little outrage going on because apparently the judge, because she's in trouble, the judge decided to let her off on bail. And the state prosecution said, "Your Honor, we really think she's a flight risk and she's a danger among kids. Can you at least confine her to house arrest and make her wear some sort of ankle monitoring system?" And I just can't believe the shithead judge said no. Now, does she strike me as somebody that's going to take off out of the country? No, and I'm sure there's a lot of people keeping an eye on her just to see if she tries, right? But still, it comes across like the judge doesn't really care. Now, I suppose we could all be getting conned here, and the 32-year-old could be joking, but here's the thing. He looked like he weighed 100 pounds, from what I understand. They didn't show him, at least not that I saw. Looks like almost all his teeth are falling out of his mouth, and you and I have all seen people that have bad tooth decay. That's something that happens from, neglect. Apparently the father said that they don't even really like going to doctors. So they had every excuse in the book. Mr. Lopes, he said that he would come by the house and they would see this guy through the window, but his mom and dad never let him come out to play. One of the things that the mom did, and I think she did this because her husband is no longer alive, Richard's actual dad was blamed by the stepmom They basically said, hey, this is the way the dad intended him to be raised. This is not the way I raised my daughters that were also in the house. And it just seems like the supreme evil. Either the mom was the main reason it happened, or maybe the dad was, but either way, how could you let your significant other treat their child that way? Isn't that just the meanest, most horrible thing ever? I had one of those days at work where you just kind of stress out. I had two people, and I'll leave them nameless and stuff, but one person was supposed to go to an interview, and I called them this morning right before their interview to wish them luck, and they're outside and you could hear them driving, and they're like, yeah, I'm going to my interview right now, thank you so much. And apparently that was a bold-faced lie, because she never went to her interview. And then when I ended up calling her, she kind of ghosted me from that point on. Now, hopefully she's ghosting me and she didn't like get in some sort of horrific car accident, you know? The other person, all of a sudden I shoot her a text and I'm like, hey, the school would like to move forward and go ahead and give you the role. Are we good to go? And all of a sudden, out of the blue, she goes, what are the school hours? So I tell her the school hours, you know, for the umpteenth time. And then she responds back, I can't do that. You know, I gotta have a school that starts a little closer to 9 a.m. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't know any school in the country that starts at 9 a.m. They're all in that 8 o'clock, 8:30, you know, 7:45 range. So one of those things where sometimes in my job, you can put together a couple bad days in a row and it just sucks. You know what I mean? And so that's why I walk. And that's why you should walk too, because every time I have a bad day, I'm assuming there's a certain number of you guys that feel the same way. Gosh darn it, what a horrible day at work. Okay, well, if you're having a horrible day at work, put your shoes on. Let's go walk off a little of that frustration and see if we can feel a little better in the process. One of the things that makes me feel better is when you hear about stories like this, because again, if I end up spending the night at my friend Richard's house and his dad was half as evil as they made him out to be, you know, that could have been a really bad situation for me. I am so thankful that I never ended up staying in that house with him. I think the reason I didn't stay is because the house was very, very unclean. And it just had one of those really gross smells to it. And I knew even back then when I was younger, like, people shouldn't live like this. Like, now that I look back, I think they might have been hoarders, if that makes sense. Every time I would watch that show, Hoarders, you can't help but think those people are a little mentally sick, right? You gotta be sick if you're living in a house. And then I remember one time I saw this one episode of Hoarders where they informed a woman that they had found her deceased cat, or it might have been a deceased dog, but apparently it was smushed under a mountain of garbage. I mean, is that just morbidly upsetting or what? One of my favorite Hoarders shows of all time was one where they were in the bathroom, and in the toilet, apparently the toilet had stopped working many, many years before. And there was just like a mountain of poop in the toilet, and it was like just super high. And you're just kind of picturing like, how the hell does somebody just poop that many times into a toilet that doesn't work, right? And they're having a conversation in the room. It's two of the people that are there to clean up. You've seen the movie Hoarders, right? And all of a sudden they're looking at each other and they just both look like they want to cry, not because it's sad, but because apparently it just smelt that bad in the room, right? If they're crying tears of sadness, you can understand. But they look like they were ready to cry because they couldn't stand the smell of that room. I don't know why I mentioned that. Oh yeah, because my friend Richard, his house, it was just kind of unkempt in a way that I didn't want to stay there. And I'm so glad that I went with my gut there. Again, I'm a big proponent, guys. If your gut tells you don't do this or don't do that, or even on the opposite side, if your gut says do this, try to listen to your gut. The gut is never wrong. So as I said, he took his dad's lighter. He takes the hand sanitizer, which is alcohol based, right? And he takes some printer paper and he starts a fire up on the second floor of his house. This fire forces his mom to call 911, so there was some genius to it. Real quick, you know, it's funny, if I'm able to put this all together and it sounds halfway decent, that's just the magic of editing. I'm barely able to talk today, apparently, but Kimberly Sullivan's lawyer says that Kim was actually shocked by these allegations, and she considers herself falsely accused. She says that the husband, Mr. Sullivan, who passed away again last year, he kind of dictated how his son was raised. So that was her defense, that this was all on her husband, Richard Chapman's father, okay? And again, she's got some proof of that from the standpoint of she allowed her daughters to live normal. I just can't believe that at no time the daughters didn't tell their friends or their boyfriends or their teachers about how their brother never got to leave the house. That seems really, really strange to me. Another thing apparently is that she had said that she never locked up her son, but apparently when the investigators and the fire department went into the house, there was actually a lock on the outside of his door. And you know as well as I do, they're only going to have a lock on the outside if you're trying to lock somebody into their room. Could you imagine your folks locking you into your room, and not just for like a night or two of being grounded, but imagine them locking you in for 20 years, stunting your growth, because obviously when you're 12 years old, you're not starting to realize, oh my God, I'm a 32-year-old dude now. He must still think of himself as a child. That's just devastating. What doesn't make sense to me, and again, I don't know how mean his parents were. Apparently they were mean sons of bitches, right? But what doesn't make sense to me is when I was 11 and 12, I was already at that age where I would have known right away, this can't be right. But again, for all I know, he could have just been in a really scary situation. So I'm not passing judgment, but in case you're thinking the same thing I am, God, I can remember when I was an 11 and 12-year-old, I just don't know how this is possible. You would think that the school and the students would do wellness checks, and I think they were saying that there was a time back in 05 or 07 where they actually did do a wellness check and they deemed that it was all normal and okay. So who knows how this is going to all turn out. Patricia Allen says, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't Patricia Allen the name of the woman that played the mom on Tim the Toolman Taylor's show? What's that called? Home Improvement? I think that lady's name was Patricia Allen. So anyway, here's a comment by a person named Patricia Allen. It says, if it were a man who held a young girl for 20 years, he wouldn't have gotten bond. Yeah, see, this is one of those things where, once again, I feel like we have a high percentage of judges that really love to kind of play the role of God. I honestly feel in my heart, as crazy as this sounds, I think it would be best if the first things that we switch over to artificial intelligence, I don't think we should do it with fast food or anything. I think we should take away people's rights to be on parole boards and judges, and I think we should go with artificial intelligence there. And I know people are thinking, oh my God, Jesse's the Antichrist. All I'm saying is, you would think that people could make a better decision than a machine. But my God, people make horrible decisions. How do you let this woman out with absolutely nothing more than just paying her bail? Isn't that crazy? Joanne Timberman says, they need to get rid of this judge. I agree, Joanne. This woman kept him in that room for 20 years. That's 20 years of abuse. And she got to walk free. That's what blows me away. What magic words did she say to this judge? Just really, really weird. Again, the only thing I can think of is that the judge is saying, hey, there's a 1% chance that this 32-year-old dude is making it up. That's the only thing I can think of. But I mean, guys, the guy looked like he weighed 90 pounds, totally emaciated, hair all dreadlock looking because he wasn't able to clean it. How horrible is that? Teeth falling out of his mouth, out of the tooth socket, because they wouldn't go take him to get, to see a dentist and get his teeth fixed. All right, here's another message. I forgot to write down the person's name. It says, the Turpins in California were 5 adult children, and the oldest of them was 29 years old. Their parents were hardly ever at home, but they stayed in place because they were terrified. So no one should judge. I think when kids get traumatized repeatedly and they're afraid of their parents at a young age, I believe it stunts their growth. Because you have to ask yourself, how are 5 adult children, the Turpins, I've never heard of them, by the way, if you have, let me know, how are they going to let their parents, who are never even there at the house, control them in such a way? But if you've been getting the shit scared out of you by your parents ever since you were 2 or 3 years old, that's the only life you know. But that does sound crazy, doesn't it? Could you imagine 5 20-year-old people in a house that are afraid to go outside because of their 50 or 60-year-old parents? Cheryl Mashad says, this is 5 minutes away from me. I plan on being at the courthouse on the 26th. My heart hurts for this young man. I don't know if she's ever driven by that house, but I'd imagine there's people that have probably said, oh my God, I've driven by that house hundreds of times in my life and never knew anything wrong was happening there. And that's why I wanted to walk you guys by that house that we did. There's people that live there now, and there's people that have probably lived across the street from them for many years and never even thought twice that the house that's right there had so many horrors and atrocities happen. Because apparently my friend Richard's dad molested multiple children in that house. That's why I was telling you, for whatever reason, I guess your boy was too ugly for him. Thank goodness. Black Magic says, if Kimberly Sullivan is sentenced to anything less than 20 years in the hole, then justice has failed to be done. Black Magic, I feel like these judges are always failing justice. Remember the other day we hear about the 340-pound woman that gets a maximum of 6 years for taking the little boy's life by squishing him to death? I mean, now you got this judge, he lets her out on bail. Whenever they give you bond or bail, whatever the amount is, all you got to do is come up with 10% of that. So apparently she had enough money to just walk away, and it's like, golly, way to go, judge, way to make a horrible calling. Now watch, if she ends up being exonerated for this and it was all just a lie, then we'll look back and we'll say, hey, that judge, he did the right thing. That's how easy it is to be on one side of right versus wrong, just like that. What if we're all wrong and she ends up being innocent? Another thing that we have to remember is sometimes people have a lot of money for a good lawyer. This is the problem I have with lawyers. Some of them are so talented that they're actually able to help the bad guy win. I wish there was a way we could get around that, right? But I guess there's never going to be, because there's always going to be talented lawyers. With that being said, even if you're a lawyer, why don't you go put your shoes on and take a walk and see if we can figure out some answers to life's problems together. And I'll see you tomorrow. Have a good night.